architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are once again listening to Architecture Talk. Each week we try and have a conversation with a contemporary thinker on issues of architecture and architectural thinking, and we are trying to advance that frontier of architectural thought. Today we are going to do that in a conversation with my next door colleague Nicole Huber, who in her work on the turn of the century German modernists and on her work on film theory and the writings of Bruno Latour and associated thinkers, is interested in the project of rethinking modernity, of rethinking architecture and the form and purposes of architecture, not as that of inscribing and thinking utopic final solutions, but as that of investing in an eternally unfinished project and unmade work, something that goes on continually. It's a fascinating conversation, and I hope you will enjoy it. Here we go. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to Architecture Talk.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you very much for your invitation. Glad to be here.
So you describe architecture as fiction making in your syllabus on architecture and fiction. As imagining worlds.
As imaginary, yeah.
As imagining worlds.
Yeah. And I think, just to, let's say, imagining worlds, imagining alternative worlds.
Alternative worlds, yes.
Yeah.
Or a world, or desired worlds, or desirable worlds.
Yeah. I think that, obviously, I think that there's a biographic just reason for doing that, right? But at the other side, there's also
What's the biographic reason? What do you mean?
That I was always attracted to storytelling. It was always much more about the stories behind that can be generated by spatiality, rather than the space in itself, or rather than the architecture itself. Right? I was never attracted to an architectural location in itself.
What about construction? Were you ever in
the object.
Yeah,
right?
the object and how to make it.
Exactly, right. And the detail and whatever.
Rather, you're always interested by the story.
It was rather about the story. The
Do you remember like a deep, old story from your childhood that really stayed with you?
From my childhood?
Anytime.
There I would have really to dig down. But one story that I clearly have in mind that's really, just also beautiful, where I actually also came back to architecture, because I had a phase where I was really interested in urbanism. The urban, and the architectural, the architectural project was not of my interest. And that was also in Paris. Being in Paris, and also with a couple of colleagues from Spain, from the US, and obviously, from France. And there was one colleague who absolutely wanted to see Oscar Niemeyer's Siège Communiste. So the communist
in the university.
The seat.
Oh, communist seat.
It's just the seat of the Communist Party.
Okay.
And it's this kind of boomerang shaped.
Yeah.
And his French was not particularly good. So I said, okay, let's just go in and just see whether we can take a look.
Yeah.
And so we went in. And it was completely deserted,
Yeah.
And there was basically nobody there.
Yeah.
And that was also clear, So we asked whether we could take a look, and then this woman, she just looked at her calendar and said, well, I've pretty busy, but there was nothing there. But we got then an appointment for the next week. So we went in. And she showed us around, and so we took a look at all the offices and the rooftop and the like, and that it just really reminded me of Solaris, right?
Solaris.
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick.
the movie by Tarkovsky.
Tarkovsky's Solaris, yes.
And so it really is about this kind of dream world of a completely, basically futurist past that has aged. So the office were in a complete mess, and they were also abandoned. Just there were not a lot of people walking around.
Right.
And their conference hall was also, it's normally also used for fashion shows now and the like, because it's not.
Yeah.
And there it was really this kind of that sense that actually the key to architecture is the imaginary, is then the relation to narratives, to stories, and in Solaris, I'd say also just the yearning that is related to that storytelling.
Yes.
So when I look back, it's just it was always about some kind of story that's related to whatever I was doing or pursuing. But I think in academia, if we now speak of architecture education, right, I think it is also, it might be a way of getting criticality back into the teaching of architecture. So when we just look at the 2000s and this whole post-critical turn, and the whole ways in which then philosophy, psychoanalysis, gender studies, whatever, was seen as being not necessarily so relevant anymore, and then computation and the whole issues of sustainability and resilience and whatever took over. It just brought in a different tone of how to understand then the reality in which we, let's say, we live, right?
Right.
And to make the students also reflect upon it, and that then comes back to this notion of objectivity, because I think since the 2000s it was also pragmatism and its sense of what reality is, or what we should strive for in the construction of architecture, is very much based on evidence and objectivity. So you have that in simulations of buildings or for buildings, and obviously just the whole models of environmental behavior and the like.
Why do you think this post-critical?
Yeah.
Why do you think that came about?
It was connected to an economic boost cycle when there was just a lot of construction going on, and the economy was not seen as a problem anymore.
Okay, now that's
so that was in 2002, and so it was just it's just
we've got too much work, too much money, and no time to think theory.
Yeah, exactly. We do not. There is no need to bring in this critical thinking, but we have enough money to just to build, to construct, right? And in 2008 that was over, right?
So theory and history and sort of criticality and narrativizing architecture is connected to economic depressions.
I think so. I think in this kind of post-critical phase.
Yeah.
And we basically followed up on that when we were doing our work on Las Vegas. It was always
you and
based,
Ralph.
Exactly. It was just always Las Vegas as this promised land, right? You go there, you get your mortgage, you buy a house, you have a job there, and you can raise a family. That was basically the promise of the city.
Yeah.
And then. And that was also true for students. We just went there and they started working and started studying and the like. And then in 2008 they found out that the houses were underwater. So that then through this whole mortgage crisis, the whole dream, form of a new American dream or an American dream, then experienced that bust. Right?
So we are certainly in the middle of a mega bust right now with our current president.
Yeah.
And sort of very clear immediate and present signs of climate change and its dangers. I mean, I feel spooky nowadays in Seattle when I look up and see all these clear skies every day, day after day. There is something wrong, don't you think?
You know, I think that's luck. You know, I mean, in a way, you know, that also just shows the extent to which these politics are clearly localized, right? I mean, the disadvantaged or you know the marginalized parts of the population. I mean, clearly then live in different conditions, right? I mean, that's also why one speaks about environmental justice or not, right? And so I think, yeah, you know, this is also what I really appreciate about Seattle is that it doesn't seem to be so. It doesn't seem to be so struck right now. But obviously, I mean, it really is the denial of climate change and the consequences of the current politics that will show in different areas, also related to migration, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And Europe is, I mean, clearly experiencing this.
Yeah, it has got its, you know, the migration crisis and the Brexit crisis.
Yeah, exactly. Which is not over, right?
No. So what do you think all these films that you have listed here, which of these films is instructive here? Mad Max? Fury Road? Blade Runner?
Yeah.
Here, let's go through your films. It's your architecture and fiction syllabus. You've got Mad Max, Fury Road, the Western, Paris, Texas, the road movie, Chinatown, neo-noir, Blade Runner, science fiction, Get Out, horror. I don't know this movie, so that's the one I'll confess I have no idea what it's about. Pan's Labyrinth, fantasy, The Party, playtime, comedy. That's it.
Yeah.
So which of these movies do you think is the most interesting narrative to access, to enter into our times today, and to think about a new architecture for the future?
Well, when I was writing that sentence, which is now a year ago, I thought it was Mad Max.
Mad Max.
And
which we loved, we saw together.
We saw together, exactly, and which was also then, I mean, just advocated for by students, right? I mean, it was also this kind of just understanding, you know, their culture, their popular culture, which I then also thought is a key in the whole series. Right? I mean, obviously, Mad Max also has its history, but the ways in which we understand utopian thinking, right, as this green place, I mean, to which they try to escape, right? I mean, this kind of motherland of the green space, only to find out that it doesn't exist anymore. You know, so the nostalgic yearning for a utopian place that would relieve, I mean, a place of redemption, essentially. And then you go there only to find out that, you know, it's paradise lost.
Right.
And the Western as a genre that was supposed to be leading you to a promised land, right? I mean, to a manifest destiny, to a sense of community, right? I mean, to a functioning community, and which then would be in a kind of, I mean, a new environment, that is a space of redemption, essentially biblical.
Yeah.
And the ways in which then the Western, of course, then turns into as a genre. I think for that reason, it's more genre-based than film-based. You know, obviously, you know, I have my favorite films, but it was always how can you abstract it into different promises or different forms of storytelling.
Right, when it becomes dystopic, so that's also I think maybe it's the sort of uncanny context behind Westworld. Have you seen the series Westworld?
No, I haven't.
It's this artificial intelligence series where they imagine that there are sort of these bionic human beings. and it's set up into this fantasy park where you can go and shoot anybody you like in an old western.
Okay. Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because they're all
Yeah.
bionic, and
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
day they just
Yeah.
come back. And there's this sort of dystopic quality to it because it's this, as you are describing, in the American imagination, and certainly in the Western global imagination, if you think of Sergio Leone and everything, and even there are Indian versions of Sergio Leone, you know. A 1975 blockbuster film called Sholay was based on Sergio Leone's sort of westerns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, but there's also then the relation between then the Western and the spaghetti Western, right? Which is
So
then
the
a
Western
different-
spaghetti Western, and then there is the chapati Western. These are called chapati Westerns.
I still have to watch those.
Yeah. But there is sort of this paradise dystopic. Paradises that turn dystopic.
Right.
That's the narrative genre.
Yep.
That's what makes them uncanny.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's this defamiliarization that is the anxiety actually that there is no way back, right? I mean, to this nostalgic place.
To this green,
this-
ultra sustainable,
Exactly. Yes. Right.
fully equitable.
So I think it's a modernist dream, right?
It's
I mean, of never,
it's
never
still
land.
alive. It's still
it's
alive.
very alive. Yes, I mean,
We're
in the
going to have
notions of
equity,
sustainable-
we're going to have inclusion, we're going to have resilience, and
Right.
we're going to be fully sustainable.
Right, exactly. But it is. I mean, so they come back. They find out that this place doesn't exist anymore. You know, it's gone. But the women are still there, and they still are the carriers of seeds for this new place.
Yeah.
And that was also the criticism of that, because these women are then native women, right? I mean, they're characterized as basically a tribal condition, as a native condition,
Right.
and they all have essentially to die to make way then for the new kind of white female leadership that then takes over,
Right.
going back and then taking the seeds with them in this.
Right.
And whatever, their fortress that
Right.
they are then taking over. Right?
So how is this a useful, or I suppose in your terms, transgressively productive image to think through or think another kind of an architectural future?
I think that it is that one is, just the conventions in which we live are so much based on evidence and what is supposed to be the factual, right? I mean, so you do analysis of a site, and then you have a program, and then you go for it, right? As if this was given, as if it was evident, that this is just the situation and also the problem that we are dealing with, and then you're a problem solver, and this is it.
Yeah.
And then we all live towards this bright and sunny future that obviously will never occur.
Yes.
But what if we just step back and just challenge the ways in which the problem is stated and raise questions?
Right.
And this is then, I think, what comes out in these films is that it doesn't have to be necessarily so. We all start in this situation of apparent, reality or apparent situation, and then we have to find out that actually things will not turn out the way in which you expected them to turn out.
Yes. As a personal biography, as the trajectory of a personal life. Is that what you mean?
I think it's a personal life as well as then cultural lives, as well as just let's say the life of all of the dreams of modernity.
Yes,
right?
of course.
That then turned into essentially nightmares.
Right.
Silent Spring and the like, right? I mean, Rachel Carson. I mean, it was just these were the promises are just. It's not that they don't come true, but it's worse, right? I mean, it is really about the destruction, right? A destruction, and this is then where utopia turns into dystopia.
And of course, the classic case, rationalization and efficiency gave us the Holocaust, as
Absolutely.
did,
Yes.
and science gave us the
Yes.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So
And that's-
modernity turns dystopic very quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Necessarily so?
You know, that is the big question. Obviously, I mean that has been raised by philosophers such as Michel Foucault. You know,
Yeah.
Jürgen Habermas still dreamt and dreams the dream of modernity, you know,
Yeah.
as an unfinished project.
Yes.
And perhaps, I mean, if we think about that, about this unfinished project, then perhaps it also just gives us a different access to reality, right? I mean, to the ways in which we actually approach our existence. And for that reason, I think that we have to ourselves, but also then teach the students to not take things as given, but rather to tap into their own imaginaries, to tap into their own yearnings and longings,
Right.
and let's say alternative worlds, right? And you see this, I mean, with students who are clearly, I mean, just not the you know, the normative, you know, white American. I mean, they want to do what is expected to do from them.
Right.
But if you ask them, you know, what they're themselves up to,
Yeah.
you get a completely different universe.
Right.
And so, and I think what's helpful for that is then, let's say, culture or counterculture. And now with these movies, I would also just say, you know, why not use Black Panther, right? I mean, which I'm so Ryan Coogler's a film to get into these notions of futurisms, right? And
Right.
to think or to work on, let's say, alternative futures that then in turn will impact back the here and now, right? I mean, the whole consciousness of your role in history. Right?
I'm trying to think, can we identify such a loop cycle that happened where in the past where alternate fictional visions looped back to invent the present?
Well, you know, I mean, I also just given, let's say, you know, then it's again, you know, my biography, but you know, obviously I've not been alive at that point, but I think in Germany it is nonetheless, it is really the end of the First World War and the whole ways in which then utopias were formed. I mean, so by the glass chain members, for example,
Right,
you know,
right,
and the November
right.
Group and the like, which were all extremely fundamentalist. And you would say, I mean, God, I mean, also then in part, I mean, if you compare the very leftist, extremely dangerous. But it was always dreaming of or planning for or actively engaging alternate realities. You know, so if you look at the work, obviously, of these expressionist drawings of utopia and, you know, all these landscapes and, you know, the Stadtkrone, you know, the city ground, and then you get a different sense of community and society, which certainly then also, as soon as then due to the American fundings, came back into the conventional planning of settlements, of housing in Berlin. So if you then look at Bruno Taut's work, for example, I think it wouldn't have been possible without all of the yearnings for this kind of utopia.
But also Corbusier's utopias in the 20s and 30s.
Absolutely. Russian, yes. And again, you know, I mean, I think it's the danger with utopian thinking is not to get into the object of this is what the concrete utopia is supposed to be, but rather stay in this process of continuously using thinking to transgress, to think beyond.
So let's turn to transgression. So thinking not as a process of identifying goals and attaining them, but thinking as constant transgression or persistent critique. What's the point if you're not going anywhere?
you are going somewhere, but it is, I think it's continuously revoking or challenging what seems to be given. So, and you know, that's also, it's not now based on, that's now biographical. I was always attracted by the provisional.
Provisional.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. And I had this conversation when I was a student, actually, with a friend of mine, who then said he was always, as a kid, you know, sitting in the back of the car, he was always surprised that the city of Frankfurt, despite the fact that they were building at it continuously, that it wasn't done. It was never done. It was just never done, right? That was a continuous process. And this was just, for me, it was always much more intriguing to have the incomplete than to have a kind of pristine, finished project in front of me. So it was always, you know, where things were, you know, I mean, parts were peeling off, the rebar sticking out. You know, where it is, I mean, that it's clear that it's not there. And then again, you know, what do you then do with this? One, I mean, you try to start writing about it. I think that's also where the narrative comes in, where there's always some yearning, there's always some possibility of change, you know, something that will still develop. And I think that then has to do with actually, you know, the professions of my parents.
Really?
Yeah, who were both doctors, radiologists.
Radiologists.
Right? Radiologists. And so if you have radiology, I mean, you clearly see, right, what's going on in your body. You know, so you have an X-ray, and it's kind of this is what you have. Right? Either you have something, either it's clean, as it's called, or there you have some kind of verb disturbance, right? So that was the thing, that reality is then a diagnosis that is complete, right? I mean, it's there. It's kind of as a product, right? It's finished, finish line, essentially. And in contrast to the diagnosis, I mean, here's the problem, verb, you know, diagnosis, how do we resolve it, right? As a contrast, I always saw design as this kind of open-ended production. And I recall there a conversation with my mother, actually, you know, who at some point asked me, you know, why the hell are you, you know, and your peers working for an entire semester on a project? You know, I mean, can't you just understand it, do it, done?
Solve it, like in a couple of days.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's like a diagnosis.
Use a computer.
And that's what she said, you know, it's kind of, well, I looked at the stuff, I mean, just you look at the X-ray and you say, this is it. You have your diagnosis, you're done.
Yeah.
Period. Right? And why, you know, why is it, you know, why isn't it the same way? Why don't you have the object? And it's kind of, And I said, because it's a design process. It is open-ended. It can always be changed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you look at Liebeskind or Scarpa, you know, I mean, obviously, I mean, Scarpa, I mean, you as far as I know, you always had to, you know, pull the plans from underneath his pen in order just to get something done. Right? Because it would just never
be done.
Never be done. Right? And this understanding, I think, of reality is and that's also where you start looking for, let's say, inspiration that is similar to it. And this is where I then started to become interested in Ernst Bloch's work, so the German materialist, Marxist philosopher, who was obviously, I mean, active in the 1920s, and then had to go into exile, you know, as a Jew, and obviously then also a communist, and then came back to Germany, and who, when he was, I mean, who wrote about the spirit of utopia, and then when he was during his exile in the 1930s in the United States, then wrote the manuscript, what he called Dreams of a Better Life, which then became The Principle of Hope, right? And then published in '54. And what he there describes as the now, so the present, right? And the present, I mean, the notion of time, not as something that is, now and then gone, right? And it turns into the past. But the present is always pregnant with the not yet.
Right.
The not yet.
And the past.
And the past, yeah. But particularly, I mean, in his sense, particularly also then the future. The not yet being, the not yet conscious, the not yet having, the not yet, I mean, that has not yet become. Right? And he felt that this comes out in daydreams, in pulp, right, in fairy tales, in detective stories. It was this kind of impulse of something that is, of searching for something that is missing. And this is what interested him, is this lack, you know, but not in a Freudian sense.
Yeah.
It's not interested in Freud, but rather in something that is for a community lacking. So I mean, he just
Always lacking.
Always lacking.
Yeah.
And
always possible.
And always possible. So what he was looking for is really he was looking for the possible, and obviously the challenge was then how to turn the abstract utopia into a concrete one. But it was always something is missing. So what is missing as a continuous process? And that did not only then relate to subjectivity, just the way in which you understand your own being and your psychology, right? But also materiality. So he understood the world as a world of continuously becoming, as a process. Right? And I think that this is interesting to think of reality not as something that is given, and either we can see it or we can't.
Right.
Either we can define it and understand its rules, or not, but something that is also in itself incomplete.
Right.
You know, so it's basically an ontology of incompleteness, of the not yet. Right? And that is how this philosopher Slavoj Zizek has also interpreted it, and I think that is an interesting way to look at reality as something that is in itself a process.
And architecture as the not yet, not complete imagining process.
Yes.
And the city as the same thing.
Absolutely, and that is where the biographical again comes in. When I came back, I returned from Paris to Berlin. Berlin was so in the 90s was informed by a form of planning that had this image of the so-called European city. As a city that is purely formal, right? I mean, so you have clear edges, a clear boundary. The city as form, right? And obviously, I mean, the city that they loved to hate was their sister city, Los Angeles, right? As they completely fractured. I mean, so it was a sister city, but it was just continuously kind of seen as the anti-example. The anti-utopia was Los Angeles, right? And Los Angeles as being that city that just continuously transformed, right? And its theoreticians, I mean, geographers, so Ed Soja, Mike Davis, obviously Michael Deere, they understood the city as a continuous process, right? I mean, space is always about obviously activity and about the
constant upsetting and constant transformation.
Exactly, and that's
and
also
constant innovation.
Yeah, and that's also where it's really interesting how also then professions changed, because both Michael Deere and Ed Soja were planners.
Yeah.
And Ed Soja then also told that story that as a planner, you just did what you have to do, and then they turned around. It was already done, by developers. So basically the object of your desire was gone, right? So this is why he turned into a geographer who simply just describes the changes, and then also said, you to continuously have to re-investigate the development of the city. But what was interesting also in their work, I mean, particularly in the work of Mike David, is that he understood his own writing, so the city, of course, as neo-noir, right? I mean, so he really, was impacted then by Chinatown, Roman Polanski's film, and just said, well, and it was then also described as the surrogate city, right? As the surrogate history of the city, right? Is then Chinatown. So are we able to actually, understand history as, also in a critical sense, but even in the critical sense, as a critical history that was then that way, or is it also a narrative? Is it also a genre, right, that we are using?
So what are the sort of interesting, from your perspective, alt narratives of Seattle? Are there any?
I think there are plenty, and the thing is that one is, I think that, just from the part of the, let's say, colonialist side, it's really the gold rush. Just as an overarching understanding of how to actually use the land and deal with the land. It's not so much the founding of the city, but I think it's really this kind of gold rush mentality. And at the other side, I think that this would be really, that would mean to get in touch with Native American history.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that would be the key. That would be the key.
Yeah.
But I'm not courageous enough to step into that, because I think it's just...
You have to. Mark Jarzembek will lead the way.
Okay.
Because you have to transgress and do exactly what you don't have courage for. That's when you know you're on to something.
Okay.
Don't you?
Well, that's the thing, where this is, these futurisms, right? The Black futurism and the Shanghai futurism, and these are the, let's say, the current criticisms of modernity are this is now also this is formulated by a philosopher called Armin Avanesian, German philosopher, somehow also other identities, right? He is of the opinion that our whole notion of time has changed through the processes of digitization. So that essentially the whole linear time from past, present, future, right? You analyze the past, this explains you the present, and then you extrapolate into the future,
right?
Has changed through algorithms, which then means that you have a preemptive medicine, you have a preemptive policing.
Yeah.
You also have just a preemptive economy, right? If you look at Starbucks, it's not only Amazon, obviously, it's Amazon, it's Microsoft, but also Starbucks. If you use their card, they just track your behavior, right?
Yeah.
And then, if you are in another city, they know exactly what kind of
big data.
latte,
So
exactly,
yeah.
big data, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and he means that that this is essentially inverting the time trajectory from the future that actually comes towards us and determines the present. So all of the algorithms, all of the calculations about our futures are determining our present.
Yeah.
In terms of a preemptive medicine, so obviously it's also really dangerous, right? Because then,
right.
immediately,
Preemptive surgeries.
Yeah, this is where then, the diagnosis part, from my parents comes back in, where you already, it's basically predicting the future.
Right.
So it's like a curse, in a way. Right?
Okay.
It's something that is
So because it's taking away choice.
Because it's taking away a future, it's already set.
Yeah.
Right. And that's obviously also the criticism of, let's say, groups that are marginalized, right? That are whose history has been taken away, like indigenous groups.
The history has been taken away, and now their future is being written.
That's exactly it.
But that's a kind of a utopianism, no?
Well, it's a utopianism of, let's say, a colonialist power, right? But
where the colonialist power is big data.
It's big data, exactly, and of course then also the nation states and obviously the companies that come along with it, and then Avanesians and the point of others is then to write counter narratives. Right. And this is Black Panther, for example, is then a counter narrative to to this this notion of progress or a future that's already set. Right?
Yeah, big data doesn't necessarily promise progress in the utopian sense. Big data just says, we'll tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly.
And it will be so.
Yeah.
But another counter narrative is Black Mirror,
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
which
I
plays.
still also have to.
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, that's also, you know, in terms of indigenous futurisms. I've already told you about this Andy Everson, right? I mean, this indigenous artist
Yeah, with
who then
the-
also then fuses, you know, the Darth Vader, you know, narrative with indigenous storytelling. Right?
Yeah. Well, this is also coming, I suppose, then into this whole effort to build smart cities by Google,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
and this idea that yeah, we will anticipate the city for you,
Yeah. Yes.
based supposedly completely on your actions,
Yeah.
but actually it's, you know, training you to be in a certain way
Yeah.
by determining your present as a setting up of the future as per the algorithm.
Right. And if you just continuously track the data, you will have an ever more complete picture. So you think. Right?
Yeah.
But there, I think that also, you know, these notions are the question then of spatiality and its nature comes back into the mix, you know. So then Henri Lefebvre's Right to the City, right? I mean, the whole way in which you think of space not as a perceived and conceived, but as a lived space, i.e. a space of transgression. This is where this might come back into the mix. But I think that this kind of, I mean, since architecture, right? Architecture, you know, so what are we actually doing, you know, by designing, planning architecture is still, and I think that Michel de Certeau is right there, that it's still trying to overcome time through space, right? I mean, you build something in order then to be able to accomplish this bright and sunny future for a community, yourself, and the American dream, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right? And so, how can we then rethink this notion of the future? I mean, as again, you know, counter futures.
So how do we do that? I mean, I guess one way is to head out to Mad Max world, or,
You know,
or what other ways are there?
think
Can
it's
you
doing
drop out of our digital future?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, or can you also within the digital future somehow
Transgress?
somehow transgress? And this is, I think, also where the students come in, because they're nonetheless a different generation. They have completely different culture. We have so many Asian students, and I mean, it's just completely different understandings of what, let's say, you know, that reality is.
What if I said you're too optimistic about the students?
I think it is. I mean, that is absolutely possible, but
Yeah.
there are always surprises.
Yeah.
And I think to be open, just to again, you know, have it not as a top-down, top-down teaching thing, but rather a kind of a discussion and just seeing, you know, what's possible. And that you yourself also challenge your ways of perceiving, you know, what's kind of doable, what's convincing, what's not convincing. That it really becomes that it becomes a discussion. And obviously, you know, there we get into pedagogy and how do we actually.
So how do you introduce surrealism into this? I think surrealism is a way, I think, to think architecture today. Who are our surreal 21st century architectural thinkers?
Woof, that's a good question.
If any.
If any. You know, I think that surrealism doesn't have the appeal anymore. I mean, that it had that it had in the 1920s.
Why not? Why doesn't it have that appeal? I mean, Abramovich is kind of surreal, isn't she?
Yeah, perhaps.
But in architecture or art, really, I mean,
Yeah.
installation, performance art. I mean, Alexander McQueen has a decidedly surreal character
Yeah.
to his work. Had.
Yeah. Well, in art, you know, I would also say, I mean, in part, you know, I mean, this, Wangeti Mutu, right? I mean, where it's Wangeti Mutu. I mean, this African artist who has also a lot of, I mean, just gender related, also, you know, relationship then to, I mean, the cosmos, you know, the earth, and it's the imagery that she works with also then has, I mean, these collages are also in part surreal. I mean, you don't know at some point, you know, what you're looking at. So it's just contrasting these different realities. And I think that also would be a way just to bring in these different, I mean, just different, let's say, different aspects of reality, contrast again different notions of images of so-called reality.
I'm trying to get back to the sort of pathways to contemporary, transgressive, conceptual, architectural pathways, if not projects, through film, maybe.
Well, one way I think again, you know, is to rethink time as more as a simultaneity of past, present, and future. And we also just for this studio watched Looper, which is about a killer who is supposed to assassinate individuals. I mean, so also killers who come back to the future into the present. So I mean, in the future, 30 years from now, time travel is invented, but you're not supposed to be not allowed to kill anymore. So people get sent back, you know, through time travel into the present, and then get killed. You know, so this one assassin, you know, then always, I mean, it's just, you know, waits for, you know, the victims to come to be projected back onto the earth, and then kills them and just makes his money that way. And someday he just has his self coming back, obviously, I mean, to be killed, right? And his own self, future self, is then Bruce Willis, right? So I mean, they already get the notion that this won't be this kind of easy deal. But it is really about the directionality of time, and then also the predetermination of time. So what if we think of the future as now, right? And the whole ways in which the openness of the now then also enables different futures or alternative futures.
Right.
But again, you know, what if we somehow spatialize times, and that also through design, and not in a kind of postmodernist sense, but rather as an understanding of different realities and relationships. And I don't know exactly, you know, what that looks like, and this is also why I essentially gave the students that assignment, I mean, just to see what kind of sense they make out of it. And as references, I mean, I just gave them the URLs to Wangechi Mutu's work, to Andy Everson's work, to the work of Jean-Michel Basquiat. And I mean, just to see, you know, what it's a search, you know. I mean, that's the thing, you know, it's the inquiry.
It's a search. It's an inquiry.
And I think that also comes back to the whole notion of architecture that we have, right? I mean, when I asked you at some point what you think architecture is, and you said it's a conversation builder, then it's also just an ongoing project.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, I would say it's about, you know, ways of life, right? Which are also open-ended.
Right. It's architecture talk.
Exactly. Yes, it's architecture talk. Right. Yeah.
Well, that might be a good place to stop. Thank you for being on Architecture Talk, Nicole.
Okay. Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is Vikram Prakash, your host, and our producer is the one and only Sammy Prouty, a graduate student of architecture here at the University of Washington in Seattle. I hope you all enjoyed our conversation, and if you did, please do take a moment to subscribe and to rate us on iTunes. See you next time. Take care. Goodbye.